Hi there, Alex Kidman with my quick video review of the iPhone SE 2020, or if you prefer the iPhone SE 2 or the iPhone SE second generation. Take your pick. This is Apple's new, more affordable smartphone. It's generated a lot of interest in an era where people are generally more interested in those kind of mid-range price phones. So in a lot of ways, it's a very smart move from Apple. So I've had a couple of weeks to test it out now as my general day-to-day driver. I also review a lot of other phones, so I've been coming and going a little bit, but this has been the primary phone I've been using. Here's what I really like about this phone. It's powerful. That A13 Bionic is absolutely the key reason why you should buy an iPhone SE 2020, because it's the same processor you find in all of the iPhone 11 phones, and that means any given app that you want to name can run on this phone and can run quite well in terms of running. So I had someone, for example, ask me, hey, will this thing play Fortnite? Well, look, I can show you. Yes, it'll play Fortnite. Now, I'm a rubbish Fortnite player, but it will run the app just fine. There is a small caveat to that, which I will get to in a minute, though. There's also a few features on this phone which you don't typically see on phones in this price bracket. It has wireless charging inbuilt, which is relatively rare. It's also IP67 rated for water resistance, which is equally rare. Now, again, small catch there. Whilst it has water resistance, it is not waterproof, and Apple's general warranty actually doesn't cover for what they call water ingress, that is, water getting into the phone anyway. So be careful, but in theory, you drop this into water by accident, and I've done this just to make sure that it would work. You drop this into water by accident, it's going to be okay. I also like that Touch ID still has a place. I know there are people who really like Face ID, there are people who really like Touch ID, and you might fall on one side of the fence or another, but the reality is, with Apple putting this into its smartphone, it means it's saying, hey, Touch ID is going to be around for at least 3 to 5 more years on iOS, because they're going to have to support it on the iPhone SE 2020 at the very least. That smaller form factor can also be a big plus. This is a very easy phone to slip into your pockets or into a bag or anywhere you care to be. Certainly much more so than, for example, the iPhone 11 Pro Max. I've kind of jumped between the two, and it was really noticeable going up to that much, much bigger device. So that's the good stuff, but are there some problems? Oh yeah, there are. Now, I've already addressed the camera in my separate review, but to give the short summary version of it, it's a perfectly fine single lens camera. It's probably the best single lens camera you can get in an iPhone, but it's far from the best single lens or otherwise camera you can get at this price point if you're happy to jump over towards Android. The Pixel 3a is the obvious competitor, and it runs rings around it for things like low light performance, but at this price you can get camera phones with 3, even 4 lenses on the back. So just having one, I get why Apple did it, I get why they went down that road, because they're differentiating. They're saying, hey, if you want the full set of premium features, you've got to pony up for the 11 Pro or the 11 Pro Max, boy. But at the same time, sticking it with the same technology, and it is the same sensor as you find in the iPhone 8, it's a bit of a retrograde step, and I wish there was some kind of middle ground where they could say, hey, this is dual lens, but maybe not as powerful as the 11 or 11 Pro. I get the market position, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing for consumers. The screen is small, and it's got very, very large bezels, and the issue with this is that when you're running certain things, especially when you're running apps like games, your thumbs take up a lot more of the screen space, and not a lot of apps always think that way anymore, because with Face ID common on other iPhones, of course, you've got pretty much all the screen to play with. Here, that's just not quite so. So, for example, again, while I'm a rubbish Fortnite player, part of my challenge with that was that so much more of the screen was taken up with controls. Obviously, that's going to depend on the apps that you run. The other thing that they kept from the iPhone 8, I wish they'd upgraded, was the battery, because the battery life is not good. Now, it's a bit of a cliche, it's almost a stand-up routine to say that iPhone battery life is pretty woeful. And unfortunately, the iPhone 8, just the 8, not the 8 Plus, had pretty bad battery life. That hasn't really changed for the SE 2020. It's impressive in one way, I guess, that you can run the A13 Bionic on the same battery and get about the same battery life. That doesn't make it good battery life, though. To give some perspective on this, running a video full screen for about an hour on this phone saw the battery life drop by about 20%. Running the Australian government's COVID Safe app for about an hour saw the battery drop by 10%. It's pretty easy to chew through all of the battery on this phone before a full day is out. Now, you do get wireless charging. It will support fast wired charging, although not from the charger you get in the box. And again, I wish Apple had really pumped up the wattage on that in-box charger a little, but I get why they sort of didn't. But the practical upshot of all of this is that this is a sort of flagship phone with way under flagship battery performance. So who should buy it? Well, I do think there's a market for every phone for every buyer, and in this case it's pretty obviously upgraders from much older iPhone devices who want to stay in the iOS world. Now, if you're coming from, say, last year's iPhones, no, this is not the phone to jump up to, because even though it's technically a bit more powerful, it's going to have a much worse camera, it's got much worse battery life. I think those things probably do outweigh that processor performance. But if you were already sitting on, for example, the first generation SE, I know some folks still run those, or a 5 or a 6 or maybe even a 7, this would be a pretty big jump up in performance. It's also a nice future-proofing move, and this is, I think, the other thing. It's not just about, hey, this can run apps and the A13 Bionic's very powerful. It's also, this will see iOS upgrades for a good number of years, because Apple has no real reason to say, hey, we don't support this for at least as long as it supports the 11 Pro or 11 Pro Max, for example. However, if you are happy to look across into the Android space, at this price point you can get much better battery life, you can get much more flexible cameras that can do much more interesting things, and I think this is not a switcher's phone. This is not a phone that will make people go, no, I want to move away from Android and to iOS or back to iOS. I think the flagship phones still sit in that space. So that's my opinion. What's your take on the iPhone SE? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.